Good evening, I'm NIMA RAJAN, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, January 17th. We begin tonight with a look at inflation. Statistics Canada says the high cost of groceries offset cooling gas prices to slow inflation in December. Canada's annual inflation rate was at 6.3% for the month, down from 6.8% in November. Canadians paid 13.1% less at the gas pump in December compared to November. But grocery prices were up 11% on an annual basis. This is a slight improvement from the 11.4% in November. All right, turning to the annual pace of housing starts in Canada, which slowed down in December. That's according to a new report from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, which says that housing starts slowed 5% last month compared with November. The report says the seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts was over 248,000 compared with over 263,000 in November. All right, well, meanwhile, the CEO for the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC said changes coming to the approval process for new housing will address long-standing challenges to the industry. Neil Moody says the old provincial reviews, which often had to go through multiple ministries, contributed to long approval timelines. Now, Premier David Eby says his government is creating a single hub for developers to get provincial approval for their projects. This comes in a move aimed at reducing the approval time to a few months. It will replace the current process where home building authorizations can sometimes take up to 2 years for approval. Canadian efforts to help Afghans and embassy staff flee Kabul after the Taliban took over Afghanistan are being commemorated with a plaque. According to a memo obtained by the Canadian press, Global Affairs Canada plans for a $10,000 plaque were approved by a high-ranking public servant. However, opposition parties are calling the plaque inappropriate, given that Canadian soldiers and veterans told a parliamentary committee about major problems with the operation. Canada's final commander in Kandahar during the Afghan war said only about 16% of interpreters who served alongside Canadian troops were saved during the operation. Moving to Quebec now, where provincial police and forensic specialists have found the remains of 3 missing people. The tragic discovery comes after they combed through the site of last week's explosion and fire at a propane facility north of Montreal. Police confirmed on Monday that the victims were located in the ruins of Propane La Fortune, and they have been taken to the province's forensics lab for formal identification. 2 employees and a subcontractor were reported missing after Thursday's blast. Police said experts are still examining the scene and are speaking with witnesses in order to determine what happened. The chief of an Indigenous organization in Saskatchewan says Justin Trudeau should have gone to the Star Blanket Cree Nation when he was in the province yesterday. The First Nation announced last week that a fragment of a child's jawbone was unearthed and ground-penetrating radar found 2,000 areas of interest. Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Chief Bobby Cameron says a visit would have shown respect to residential school survivors, and his failure to go there shows their suffering isn't valued as much as his tour of a rare earth elements processing plant in Saskatoon. Mr. Trudeau has called the discovery of the partial remains heartbreaking. All right, well, next door in Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith is snuffing out her push for amnesty for those who violated COVID-19 rules. Ms. Smith says some people may think Canada is like the U.S. and premier-level politicians can offer pardons, but that's not the case. She says in this country, it's up to prosecutors to make those decisions, and she will respect and not interfere in that process. On the East Coast, residents of the Outer Battery neighborhood in St. John's, Newfoundland, are disappointed and dumbfounded at City Council's claims that it can't do anything to stop floodlights from shining into their homes. Judy Adler says the powerful lights installed on a shed owned by Colin Way last spring shined right into her bedroom. This is affecting her sleep and her mental health. Mr. Way is facing charges of extortion and mischief in connection with his use of the floodlights. Well, we all know Max Kerman can fill a stadium with his rock band Arkells, but his latest claim to fame revolves around clearing the streets. The frontman of the Hamilton Act secured a landslide victory in the city's Name That Plow contest. Now, this resulted in one of 10 newly named snowplows being dubbed the Max Kerminator. Mr. Kerman told the Canadian press that he was delighted by the, quote, incredibly stupid honor. Forum Daily will be right back after the break, and when we return, we're going to take a look at Canada's new alcohol guidance. We're going to speak with Dr. Tim Nami from the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research. A new report from the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction says labels on booze containers are needed to warn consumers about the serious risks linked to alcohol consumption. The new guidance is based on the findings of 23 experts. They analyzed close to 6,000 peer-reviewed studies during a 2-year process that also considered public feedback. Now, according to the most recent available data, alcohol is associated with a number of cancers, including breast, colon, mouth, throat, and liver. Well, joining us now to talk more about this issue is Dr. Tim Nami, Director of the Canadian Institute for Substance Use Research and a member of the advisory group that designed the new guidelines. Dr. Nami, welcome to Forum Daily.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, we all know that drinking can be bad for you, but what sort of new information has this report revealed when it comes to drinking alcohol?
Well, I think basically what a lot of the science has been showing over the past 10 to 15 years is that the risks start to go up at levels that are quite a bit lower than have been appreciated before. So they start to go up as little as over 2 drinks per week, which is a surprisingly low amount. So our objective here is to inform Canadians about the risks of alcohol consumption, and to the extent people are willing to cut down on their drinking, that would be wonderful for their health.
All right, so what exactly are these guidelines specifically calling for? What would these labels look like? What would they say?
Well, one of the things is we're trying to help people understand different risks of drinking based on how much they drink, so they can make informed choices about whether they might consider cutting back on their consumption. The problem is that in Canada, there's no way of knowing what a standard drink is to even assess one's level of risk. So what we're calling for, in addition to giving information and guidance to citizens, we're also calling for labels, mandatory labeling of alcohol products. So that would include things like defining in, let's say, a bottle of whiskey, how many standard drinks are in this bottle, and what is the volume that constitutes a standard drink, as well as things like, warning labels, particularly for cancer. Alcohol is an important cancer-causing agent. None of that information, or even the calories in a drink, has more calories per gram than sugar. None of that information is found on the bottle, and I think we think that consumers have the right to have that information in an accessible way.
Now, these guidelines are quite a drastic shift from previous guidelines back in 2011. I believe it's 15 drinks for men and 10 drinks for women a week. So tell us a little bit more about these new guidelines and the effects and risks associated with even small doses of alcohol.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that is because of the shifting science that, the effects, particularly on cancer, and also actually the surprising effects of increase in heart problems, even at what we would have thought before were relatively low levels. We're not telling people to go for one number. We're defining risk zones. So for up to 2 drinks a week, which is a small amount of alcohol to be sure, that's the kind of the lowest risk zone for people who drink. And then 3 to 6 would be sort of a moderate one, and then it goes up beyond that. But again, our idea is not to tell people to get to a specific level, but to encourage folks to cut back from wherever they are. And even if somebody's drinking 6 or 7 drinks and they can cut down to 4 drinks per day, they're going to do themselves a world of good. So we don't want to just tell anyone, like in previous guidelines, this is the one number you got to try to get to, because we want to work with people where they are, but we also don't want to pull our punches scientifically. We want people to understand the risks and to be informed.
All right, just about a minute and a half left here, but I really want to jump to your particular research when it comes to this report. So we know you looked into alcohol attributable death and disability for this final report. What were your findings, doctor?
Well, again, what we find is that above 2 drinks per week, you have an increased risk of having an alcohol-caused death or a portion of your life removed. For each alcohol-caused death, it actually happens among, as we know, a lot of young and middle as well as older age adults. So this is not just like losing time at the end of one's life. So that's what we do. Without getting into too much gory detail, we look at the risks for each of the conditions that is known to be related to alcohol and kind of put together a composite risk curve for people, and that's how we arrive at our estimates.
All right, doctor, just a quick 30 seconds left here, but if there is one thing you want our viewers to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
Well, the one thing is that, again, when it comes to alcohol, it basically boils down to that less is more. Alcohol consumption is associated with longer and a better and healthier life.
Less is more. All right, Dr. Namey, thank you again for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break, and we're going to be taking a look at the debate over public and private health care up next. Ontario's premier recently announced that the province would expand the delivery of public health services to private centres. We're going to be speaking with Ms. Colleen Flood, research chair in health law and policy and professor at the University of Ottawa after the break, so stay tuned. The private healthcare debate has been sparked again following Ontario's move to expand the delivery of public healthcare services to private centres. Premier Doug Ford says this is in an effort to help eliminate the backlog of procedures. Now, he says these procedures will continue to be paid for by the Ontario Health Insurance Plan. But critics are concerned about what the plan will do to hospital staffing levels. The announcement has also garnered a variety of reactions from the Prime Minister and other federal leaders in regards to maintaining the universal public health care system. Well, joining us now to give us deeper insight into this issue is Colleen Flood, research chair in health law and policy and professor at the University of Ottawa. Ms. Flood, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start by going over this new three-step plan in Ontario and what exactly it will look like for patients in the province.
Well, I think that's a tricky question because there's not a lot of detail provided. But essentially, it sounds like the plan is to expand the sort of current array of services that are provided through private for-profit and not-for-profit clinics outside of hospitals. So the usual things like diagnostics, MRIs, and these kinds of things. But then to further expand eventually into other kinds of elective surgery, so cataract surgery and hip surgery. But there's not a lot of detail provided as of yet of how all of this will occur, how it will be regulated, how it will be funded. So we just have a general sense of expansion sort of slowly, but then ramping up into areas that historically, have been delivered inside public hospitals.
Now, meanwhile, we're hearing a lot of concern around the stability of the public healthcare system and hospitals amid these investments in private care. So what are your thoughts on this? How would this likely impact the public system?
I think the biggest concern here is the diversion of nursing staff to these centres. And, we already have such a problem at the moment with the burnout and toll that particularly nurses, but other healthcare providers have endured for the last 3 years of the pandemic. So, to set up perhaps another place where they might be able to go and work rather than inside the public hospitals is quite concerning right at this point in time. Perhaps at another point in time, if we felt we had, a robust supply of nurses and other healthcare providers, it wouldn't be so worrisome. But I think, up and down the country where we've heard terrible stories of overcrowded ERs, people dying in ERs, people not being able to get care for their kids, many people not being able to even get into a wait list because they can't see a family doctor to even, be queued to see a specialist. So, for my 2 cents, this is where, if we've got an ounce of extra capacity, I would hope that this is where the government would really be trying to put the resources. This is where we really desperately need it right now. And not to say that addressing wait times isn't really, really important for cataract care and hip operations, but, I think right this moment, the crisis is in the ER and in primary care.
So, what would be your suggestions around improving the public healthcare system from your own personal perspective and research on healthcare systems around the globe? Just about a minute
Mm.
and 20 seconds left here, ma'am.
Well, yeah. Oh, you don't want me to give you my doctoral thesis. Um, the first thing that would be great is if we actually had a central queuing system for folks, so that instead of my family doctor just sending me to the orthopedic surgeon or the cataract surgeon that she happens to know, that there's an orderly kind of procession through regional or provincial method, so that I'm matched onto the first available surgeon depending on my acuity. So we have no idea, when my lovely family doctor, I'm so lucky to have one, sets me up with, orthopedic surgeon or something, whether someone just down the road or, an hour's drive away might have had a cancellation. So, these are some pretty low-hanging fruit that we could really do really quickly to improve people's access to care and give them security, that they aren't just sort of hanging in the wind, that, that the system is looking after them and that their needs will be met just as soon as humanly possible with the resources that we have.
All right, Miss Colleen, thank you again for your time today on Forum Daily. We appreciate your perspective.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back. The final death toll from a weekend Russian airstrike in southeastern Ukraine has reached 44. This comes as the body of another child was pulled from the rubble in Dnipro. 5 children were among the dead in Saturday afternoon's airstrike, which was the deadliest since last spring. 79 people were injured in the attack. Meanwhile, the First Lady of Ukraine has urged world leaders to use their influence to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Olena Zelenska addressed heads of state and corporate executives at the World Economic Forum's annual gathering in Davos, Switzerland. And she said not all of the leaders were using their influence at a time when Russia's invasion is leaving children dying and a world struggling with food insecurity. Ukraine and Russia were key suppliers of wheat, barley, and other food supplies to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia prior to the war. The European Union is pushing forward with a massive clean tech industrial plan. It aims to keep the continent in the vanguard of plotting a greener future, but it also guarantees its economic survival as it faces challenges from China and the United States. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented the outlines for her Green Deal industrial plan, which will make it much easier to push through subsidies for green industries and to pull EU-wide projects that are boosted with major funding as the EU pursues the goal to be climate neutral by 2050. Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg joined hundreds of protesters in Germany today, demonstrating against a coal mine expansion. She was one of the many demonstrators carried away by police from the edge of the mine near Lützerath. She stood at the brink of the open pit, which is a move that police called dangerous. The village of Lützerath was evacuated by police in recent days and is sealed off. Numerous demonstrations against the mine expansion took part across Western Germany. Somalia's military says 5 soldiers and 21 al-Shabaab fighters have been killed north of the capital of Mogadishu. The al-Shabaab extremist group has claimed responsibility for the attack on Tuesday. A soldier told the Associated Press that the military had prior intelligence about the attack. Somalia's government is currently leading what is being described as the most significant offensive against the al-Shabaab extremist group in more than a decade. The latest from Sunday's crash of a Yeti Airlines plane saw Nepalese authorities retrieve 2 more bodies today. The crash happened while the plane was approaching an airport in the foothills of the Himalayas. The flight plummeted into a gorge, killing all 72 people aboard. Aviation experts say it appears the turboprop went into a stall at low altitude, but it's unclear why. The plane's black boxes have been retrieved, and its data recorder is being sent to France for analysis. Well, for the first time in decades, China has fewer people than it did in the start of last year. The world's most populous country has worried for years about an aging population's effect on its economy and society, but the population was not expected to go into decline for almost a decade. The National Bureau of Statistics says the country had 850,000 fewer people at the end of 2022 than the previous year. It says 9.6 million babies were born last year. This is over 1 million fewer births than the year before, and it comes amid a slowing economy and widespread pandemic lockdowns. New questions about the stability of Elon Musk's financial empire follow his troubled takeover of Twitter. Jury selection begins today in the class action lawsuit over the alleged manipulation of Tesla stock prices, which is blamed on Mr. Musk's 2018 tweets about the electric vehicle company. Just last week, the company announced that they're cutting the price of cars globally by as much as 20%. Tesla is also seeing their stock plummet. Well, it looks like you could own a signed acoustic guitar by Taylor Swift, signed tennis shoes by Eminem, or a jumpsuit and a belt worn by a member of the South Korean pop group BTS. Julian's Auctions say the memorabilia from popular music performers will be auctioned at the Music Cares Charity Relief Auction on February 5th. All proceeds from the event will go to the charity. It helps musicians in times of financial and medical crisis. Archaeologists in Norway believe a recently discovered flat square block of sandstone with carved scribbles is the world's oldest runestone. They say the inscriptions are up to 2,000 years old and date back to the earliest days of runic writing. The runestone was discovered in the fall of 2021 west of Oslo, and experts think it will help them obtain valuable knowledge about the early history of runic writing. All right, I'm NIMA RAJAN, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.